Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, the show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Veronica Dashel, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew, Keith Johnson.
Heidi ho!
And that's it for right now.
I was going to say that
Chuck had to step away for a real quick away mission, and Alan is also on another away mission and may be joining us much, much later. But hopefully Chuck should be back with us shortly.
The way that chair is framed, I was going to say maybe he's there. He's cloaked.
Yes, Chuck is cloaked. All right. So this week we are talking about the Star Trek Multiverse. But do you have some This Week in Trek for us, Keith?
I do. Well, the multiverse, that's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yes, indeed.
This is all classic stuff right now. So back on the 5th of January, 1967, back in the day, this is a really big deal of an episode. And this was the episode where there was a character named Mr. Boma and cavemen and spears. And you know the one I'm talking about?
Nope, but it sounds campy.
It was called the Galileo 7.
Okay.
And it has a lot of tropes. One of the tropes was Kirk and crew were on some kind of away mission on a shuttlecraft. I'm sorry, not Kirk and crew, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, this bridge guy named Mr. Boma. You see one time, 2 security guards and a yeoman. So there's 7 people, and the number of the shuttlecraft is 7. And its name is Galileo. So it's the Galileo 7. So they crash on a planet that's behind like some quasar or something where the ship can't really find them. Mm-hmm. And I forget the exact mission. I should know better. But the Enterprise also has another planet it needs to be at. So this is one of those episodes where there's a Federation representative on the ship. And he spends, this guest star, he spends the entire episode saying, we got to get going. We got to get going. We got to get going. And Kirk is like, hey, I got to find Spock and the rest of the people. And the guy's like, well, I'm sorry, they may be dead, but you've got another mission. So even though he's not command, he's not Starfleet, he's an example of what people start calling like the bad admiral, because, you know, so many of the diplomats and officers on Star Trek are basically just butts. And that's literally all the guy does. But it's the episode where they land on a planet that basically has giant caveman type creatures. And like one dude gets a spear in him and another dude gets, I don't know, he gets killed somehow. You just see this big hulking figure raise above him and go bam like that.
Jeez.
And yeah, and the problem is this guy, Mr. Boma, who's ironically black, spends the entire episode criticizing Spock and talking back to Spock and being completely insubordinate. I mean, if you watch the episode, there's one point where one of the guys, the security guards, gets killed, and Spock said, well, we got to leave his body behind if we can get away. And the guy goes, well, not without a burial. And then he looks at Spock, his superior, and says, you know, I would even insist on a burial if you were lying dead out there. So it's a
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's rough. And you will find this on Facebook groups. It comes up a lot where people will say, did Mr. Boma deserve to be basically disciplined? And the answer is yes. Yeah. But the point of the episode was Spock as a Vulcan is trying to lead a group of humans in an incredibly emotional and dangerous situation. And the whole show, Spock keeps saying stuff like, I've calculated everything. I don't know why you're acting like this. I've been logical. And so it's one of those episodes. Now, the guy attacking him is ironically not McCoy. It's this other guy. So it's literally this kind of emotionless Vulcan trying to lead a bunch of humans in a desperate situation. And he never says little things like, it'll be okay. We'll make it through. He'll just say stuff like, seriously, one point he's like, security guard, you stand here, point that way. You stand here and point that way. Fire your phasers. And logically, the big giant cave creatures that just kill one of your own will probably leave you alone. So yeah, it's a famous Trek episode called The Galileo 7. And it premiered in 1967. Then this is a funny one too. These are all classics. The reason I cite these because they're classics for certain reasons. A year later, on the same date, January 5th, 1968, do you remember the episode where Kirk and Chekhov and Uhura are kidnapped by what turns out to be three kind of pastel-colored giant alien brains underneath a dome of glass, and they have to fight in gladiatorial games?
No.
I tell you, this is where you may hear Trek fans sometimes talk about money, and they say, well, I'm going to give my Quatloos That's what the term
I've heard that
includes.
term.
Yeah, it's called the Gamesters of Triskelion, and
Okay, I have heard that title before, at least.
yeah, Triskelion, of course, means Helios for sun, and the sun has three stars in the sky. And long story short, Kirk, Uhura, and Chekhov get literally transported like 900 light years in an instant. And after that, it's kind of typical. There's these beings called the providers. They're literally just big brains underneath the glass, just a brain. And what they do is they kidnap aliens from all over the galaxy and they train them and they make them fight in gladiatorial games. And then they bet quatloos on who wins because that's the only way they can get their kicks. And it's another famous one. It was another trope. You remember Arena with the Gorn, the big lizard that Kirk fought? This is another episode where, for whatever reason, the people are like, hey, folks on Enterprise, your captain's probably going to die. So you want to watch? And so it's another one of those episodes. Yeah,
Oh, geez.
they get to watch TV as Kirk does Kirk stuff. So it's another kind of famous episode for the battle and for the whole thing about the Star Trek spends a lot of time in warning us against power and how power corrupts. And these beings have this incredible power, and all they do is basically make people fight and kill each other and bet on it. So it's kind of like, what a waste of power and intelligence. That's always a caution of Star Trek.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, this is ironically the same date, January, but now I'll jump forward to 1994. In the United Kingdom was the premiere, the first time shown in Great Britain, of the episode called The Empath. And you know that one, right? That's one of Chuck's favorites.
Remember the name, and I probably remember it, but I don't remember it.
That's the one with with Kirk and Spock and McCoy are kidnapped by that goofy alien culture that wants to save one race in a planet. There's a solar system where the sun's going nova. This race of big-headed aliens that look like little Telosians can save one race among many in this area, but they want to know if this one race is worth saving. So they take Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and they have this lady whose people are natural empaths, and they want to see if she will sacrifice herself to save one of them. And if she doesn't, then her people are not worthy. If she is, then they'll save her planet. You may have seen this one. It's the one where the lady doesn't talk the entire episode. She just moves like a mime because evidently her people are mute, but she's an empath. In this case, she can touch you and heal. Like if you get cut, she can touch you and heal the cut. But she's the kind of empath her people are.
An empath skill.
Yeah, this is more like a physical thing. She's a healer, really. But the problem with the way her race works, the reason it's an issue, is she can't heal you and just heal you. When she touches you, she has to share your injury. Mm-hmm. And then so a cut appears on her and she has to heal it on her and yourself. So if you're like suffering massive internal injuries and you're about to die, she has to take those on herself. And so the dopey aliens create this experiment where they basically want to torture one of Kirk's people. And they basically say Spock will basically go insane, but he'll live. McCoy will probably die. And they want to see if she'll sacrifice herself. If she does, her people will be saved. If not, they're like, we ain't going to save anybody. So...
So she either has to attempt to save herself and lose all of her people, or
sacrifice, save her people, and yeah, it's like the old, yeah. It's interesting, but here we go again. Powerful aliens, and they're weird. That's what Star Trek is all about. Their morality is just different from ours, and the reason this show didn't premiere until almost 30 years later is it's very intense. There's some. You don't see it, but basically McCoy gets tortured, and he gets tortured where he's dying. And it starts off with there's some members of the original Federation science team. They had experimented on them, and they basically, their attitude is they're just going to kill people or hurt people until they figure out if she can do self-sacrifice. It was considered such a brutal show that it was one of the 2 or 3 episodes never shown in Great Britain at the time. It was considered too violent for British television. So almost 30 years later is when it was finally shown on television. I think you probably remember the other one, Plato's Stepchildren. That's the famous one with the Greek people. That was another one that was deemed too violent.
With Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, this is the one with the people who had telepathic abilities, and there was a little person, Alexander, who they were always messing around. It's the one where Uhura and Chapel were brought down, and the people forced them to almost get into S&M stuff. It's really bad. But it was another Violet would not
Okay.
show it in Great Britain.
I can see why.
Yeah, it's still a pretty tough one. Okay, now I'm going to jump forward one day, and in 1967 was the delivery of two final drafts for two episodes that became classic. And the reason I bring them up, these are these are prototypical Star Trek episodes. The first one was called Errand of Mercy, and you may know that one. That was the introduction of the Klingons.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember that's the one where they beam down to the planet where the people seem to be really, really, really primitive, and that's where John Colicos shows up as the first Klingon we ever see, Core, and it's
Hold on, I gotta get a comment real quick from Matt.
cool.
There's several comments that I want to get to, but let's pick
Oh,
one I
let's
want
do
to
it.
get to right
Let's
now.
do it. We gotta stretch this out. Let's do it.
So Matt Sweatman says, "I love this. Let's try to describe an episode in a way that Veronica will remember it.
I love it, Matt.
Good luck."
What's up, Matt?
All right, Keith, continue.
Okay, but you may remember that that's the famous episode where the Klingons and the Federation just went to war. They just declared war, and they beam on this really primitive planet that's like 2,000 years behind the times. And the whole episode, the leaders of the local village are incredibly unconcerned about the Klingons. There's even one point where the Klingon commander says he just killed like 100 people, and the leaders are literally sitting there smiling. And the whole episode, Kirk and Spock is right on. Kirk's like, look, we got to kill these Klingons. You got to rise up and help us kill them. And long story short, when you flash forward to the end, this is the Organians, whose name you probably know. Yes. And what it turned out is these were beings that were millions of years more advanced than humans or Klingons. And the reason they didn't care is they didn't have physical bodies. They were pure energy. They only created this like primitive planet so people could hang out and
experience life.
Yeah, well, it's just because they knew basically they had visitors, so they put on clothing, and the clothing, literally, and the clothing they put on was like people from 2,000 years before Christ or something, and then they built a castle from one of the movie Camelot and slapped it up on the hillside. And at the end of the movie, what's a big deal? This is what they call you the Deus Ex Machina, because at the end, the Organians are like, okay, we're not going to have this, and so the Organian leader stopped the war. It's a famous scene where they literally stopped the entire attack fleet, the Klingons and the Federation fleet, just as they were about to close. All of a sudden, nobody could touch their controls on the ships because the ships were too hot. And later on, they even talked about the Organian peace treaty. The Organians stopped the war. And the reason it's a classic episode, and you have to watch it, it's one of the best speeches in Star Trek. At the end, the Klingon commander and Kirk are pissed. And I mean, they're pissed. And the Klingon's like, this is all right. And there's this line where Kirk literally says, we have the right. And he's just furious. And then the guy goes, to do what? To wage war? To kill life on a planetary scale? Is that what you're fighting for, Captain? And Kirk has the grace to be embarrassed. So that was the point of the show. And then at the end of the show, he's embarrassed because he's like, I wanted to fight. And I was upset because they stopped me from fighting. So it's that lesson, you know. Yeah. It's that Star Trek lesson. And then I've got, let's see, I think there was one. Oh, this is not a good way to go out, but hey, let's do that. On January the 9th, just a couple of years later, 1969, was the 7th day of filming on the last episode of the last season of the original run of the original series. They wrapped, unfortunately, Turnabout Intruder. And that episode is real quick. You know, it's the one with the crazy lady switched bodies with Kirk and tried to become captain of the Enterprise and put him in her body. It was his ex-girlfriend named Janice Lester. And
I have mental images from screen grabs. I don't remember the episode at all whatsoever.
It's weird. Let's just say there's a scene when Janice is in Kirk's body and Kirk's in Janice's body, where McCoy is trying to tell Kirk that there's something wrong with the situation. And William Shatner, who now is a woman, is sitting there filing his nails. And he literally has a nail file. And he's so unconcerned because, of course, what else are women going to do? What else is a female captain going to do? She's going to file her nails. I mean, It's such a thing at the time. The reason it's important is it's considered one of the worst episodes of the original series. A lot of people despise the fact that it's the finale of the original series, and it's still a subject of debate because just last week in the Star Trek group I'm in, it came up. And the thing is, people always say, obviously Janice Lester was crazy because the reason she stole Kirk's body is she says, your world of Starfleet does not allow women captains. And so she's a woman, she can't command a starship. So she stole Kirk's body because he's a man. And the debate keeps raging on as people say, well, she was crazy because that's obviously not true. Obviously, she could have. The problem is that's true, but that's a retcon. It has to be a retcon because I know for a fact that in the original episode, as written, the point was that women didn't. Hey, what's up, Charles?
We just had Charles teleport in from his away mission.
Hey,
I think he decloaked.
Sorry about that day job situation going on.
Hey, no problem. We're finishing up the last of This Week in Track, and I was just telling Veronica about Turnabout Intruder.
Okay.
And yeah, I know Charles like what to come in on. And the one thing I was saying is to this day, the debate rages because just last week I was in a discussion with one of my Star Trek Facebook groups where a person says, obviously Janice Lester was crazy when she said women couldn't command starships. And as I was telling Veronica, the thing is that's true, but it is a retcon truth.
Right.
Because as written, Gene Roddenberry admitted this to both William Shatner and to Leonard Nimoy, who both were furious about the episode. That was the point, that women could not command starships, at least in the Federation. Now, of course, we know it's a retcon. So it is true now that she was just off her gourd. But as written in Universe at that time, it was true. Women couldn't command starships.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good segue. You said that was the last bit of Trek you had?
Yes,
because what we wanted to talk about this week was canon and continuity.
Yeah.
What's canon, what's not? How does canon work in a multiverse where there is time travel? And that's a perfect example right there where, I mean, if it was established on the original series that women couldn't be starships captains, obviously Strange New Worlds is also saying it's the prime universe. And you have very prominent female commanders, starship captains. And so I guess the thing that really interests me about it came up recently. Folks who listen to the show may remember that during the finale, when we were discussing the finale of Star Trek Lower Decks, and there was a very brief, like 2-second thing where the Klingons turned into Discovery Klingons. And I shot up right in bed because I was like, oh my gosh, they're just giving fuel to the fire because the clickbaiters and the YouTube hate mongers and the people who just are itching for any chance to hate on Discovery are going to jump all over this. And so I went on a little rant on it that night on the show before it was a thing. And sure enough, there's been floodgates. You can't be in Star Trek groups and not have seen the people claiming that Discovery is not canon because of this. And obviously it's false because, I mean, for one, that's just not how the multiverse works or how it was presented in that episode.
Right.
But I mean, it brings up interesting questions that we thought would be an interesting thing to talk about on the show.
So the main point that I wanted to talk about was that specific thing. Because just recently, one of my old friends that I barely honestly talk to anymore, not because of anything, but whatever. They messaged me because they were frustrated because their significant other smugly said at the end when they finished Lower Decks that makes Discovery not canon. And this person hadn't even seen Discovery, and they were just so mad. So they came and ranted to me, and I was like, yeah, they're clearly crazy because there's multiple reasons why they could have turned into Discovery Klingons. One, their timeline moves at a slower pace than our timeline. Two, their Klingons could have not evolved into what we know as our Klingons. And I had another reason, but I don't remember what it is right now. But that was the main thing that I had to say for tonight. And I wanted to make sure I got that out there before anyone else said it. And then I didn't have anything of my own to say.
Well, the thing that really interests me about it is...
They are open 24. Sorry.
That's all right. They're open 24 hours.
Yeah, good God. I've been doing this for 2 years. I still make those mistakes.
Now, the thing that really interests me about it, I guess, is the concept of canon and the prime universe, right? Because obviously, and the example I was giving to Veronica the other night when we were talking about this topic was, for instance, in Space Seed, Khan was established as being the product of selective breeding. It was a eugenics program. Right. And he had a crew of 70 some odd genetically engineered supermen who were on the ship with him, all of whom the ones we saw appeared to be his age with dark hair. Well, then you flash forward to the Wrath of Khan, And Khan is the product of 20th century genetic engineering, which is a bit of a different thing from selective breeding or eugenics program, right?
Right.
That implies more
Right.
of like it's a lab-based thing rather
Mhm.
than selective breeding. But also, all of a sudden, Khan has an army of 20-something blonde hair, blue-eyed henchmen. Gone are the folks that we saw in the first one, and there was no indication that 15 years ago there was a bunch of children on the ship, at least not in Space Seed. So, and then along the way, Khan recognizes Chekhov. He wasn't on the show at the time, right? So fans sort of gloss over those inconsistencies, but obviously there are some pretty big inconsistencies between Space Seed and the Wrath of Khan, yet both are considered to be in the prime timeline. Then later on Deep Space Nine, it was a flub, but the Admiral says in the episode Dr. Bashir, I presume, that Khan and his followers were 200 years ago, which would put them around the time of Captain Archer, not in the 1990s. And then later on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, they explicitly said that a time-traveling Romulans and people have changed history so that Khan is now born decades later and the eugenics wars happened decades later. And yet that show is also considered to be in the prime universe. Wildly, and that's a 3 Star Trek series and a movie that all present Khan differently. But they're all considered prime universe, and yet Star Trek Into Darkness, which also presents a different version of Khan, is not. So it's like, what is the prime universe? What is continuity?
And Strange New Worlds.
What Strange New Worlds?
They had Khan in Strange New Worlds, and it was
I literally just said that 3 minutes ago.
Oh, I missed the part where you said Strange New Worlds. Brain.
Yeah, in the episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I mean, really, the thing that interests me is, like, for one, can a show be canon or not canon? Does it matter? I mean, I really just sort of wanted to get some opinions on it and open up some discussion, because I mean, if you're in a multiverse and there's time travel where people are changing history, like, what does it matter? And there's already, even in the prime timeline that we know, there's inconsistencies. So really, I mean, really, what is the point, and does it matter? Keith.
So before we go too deep into this, because I wanted to get back to at least one other comment, also from Matt, because he put this at the top of the show.
Okay.
Seeing Veronica take control was like when Troy took command of the Enterprise. And I don't know if
we haven't crashed and burned, though.
Insulted.
No, we didn't crash and burn. Matt, since y'all just saw it, it's more like when Troy took control of the Enterprise in Disaster, when she saved the ship.
I saved the ship.
Yeah.
Right. So Keith, what do you think? I mean, does it matter?
I think it does, but I think this is one of those where, like you said, this is literally where it's like they say your mileage may vary, because there are some things about not following canon that drive me crazy, and there's some things that don't. For example, the blonde young people in the movie Wrath of Khan is noticeable, but it doesn't destroy because it makes no sense. One of the reasons to go to a certain place, one of the reasons they absolutely made a point of, is all the people on Khan's ship, they specifically talked about how they were decidedly non-Western European. There was the whole point. They were South Asian. Khan is actually a Sikh, even though it's become a thing where he gets played by a Latino. At least that's because they were going to get Benicio del Toro to play him in the movie, right, because they wanted another Latino to play what should be a Sikh, which I found very interesting. But the point was, Khan ruled a quarter of the earth during the eugenics wars, and that was mostly Southeast Asia, what we call India, so forth. So to have a bunch of blonde young people show up makes no sense to me. And there's no way that I can see that they can even, there's nothing that makes sense. I've even had some people say, well, they just grew up real fast. And then, like you said, I heard somebody say, well, they just had a bunch of babies, and because they're genetically altered, they just aged really fast. Okay. It makes no sense, but it doesn't ruin the show for me. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't bother me. The truth of the matter in real life is Hollywood was kind of focused on getting blonde-haired people, and they just forgot. I saw an article when the movie came out. It was either Time magazine or Newsweek, a reputable magazine, and it says Ricardo Montalban reprises his role as the android Khan. So he'll just get it wrong. Now, the thing with Chekhov, there we go, Charles, and I'm usually not the guy. I have no idea why people are tripping on that. Literally, you'll see themes and memes on there was one I saw just 2 weeks ago. They were in the bathroom standing at the urinal, and there was Chekhov and Khan. And it was a joke and said, so this is where Khan met Chekhov. And the whole thing was, they can say, well, I don't know what the exact history is. If Chekhov was on the ship at the time, maybe he just wasn't on the bridge. Maybe he was like Riley down in the lower decks, right, or something like that. But for me, I think that to a certain extent, as much as possible, you try to preserve canon and you try to preserve in-universe logic, simply because the show holds together better. And I think one of the things, there's people on the other side who will say anybody who ever cares about canon or cares about in-universe science in Star Trek is anal, and they need to get over it. But I say one of the reasons Star Trek is as good as it is they try to maintain internal consistency and logic in universe. There's no such thing as the lithium crystal, but they have used that, and that's part of their in-universe science. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I had a little bit of trouble with Discovery was the spore drive was beyond what the science they said they had. But it's fine. They tried to make it sound scientific. So I think I go back and forth. I think the white-skinned Klingons in Discovery was an absolute mistake, only because it just makes no sense that 10 years before Kirk and Spock, you had these white-skinned Klingons. I just don't understand. Well, I know why they did, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. But I think it's case by case.
After the original series, you have ridge-headed Klingons. Does that make more sense to you?
Well, see, here we go. See, you make a point, because Gene Roddenberry just said, look, we didn't have money to do it. This is how they always look. Can we please go around it? Just get over it. And then Enterprise came up with an excuse that makes no sense. And spoilers for those who haven't seen Enterprise, as you know, it was a virus. And supposedly they used to look like Worf. The virus made them look like humans. But then, of course, it's like, well, then how come Kane, Kor, and Koloth look like humans? But then they look like Worf later on. So they had cosmetic surgery later on. Now it starts to get crazy.
Right.
I mean, they've proven that you can do cosmetic surgery. They made Cisco look like a Klingon. So.
Well, that's true. So I think my answer is it depends. But I feel generally that you should preserve canon and history and in-universe science as much as possible, simply because it makes the show consistent for me.
Well, I've got another example. It came up when we were discussing Star Trek: The Next Generation season 4 just recently on the show, when Matt and Elaine Sweatman were on. That obviously Odan looked different than Dax, right?
Yeah.
But also the biology of the Trills was explained differently.
Right.
The fact that they were even symbiotic beings was a big secret, right? And then they completely rewrote the Trill for Deep Space Nine without explanation. I mean, Cisco had been friends with Curzon for over a decade. I mean, I wouldn't imagine that would be a secret, that he was a Trill, and how symbionts work, right? The fact that they all of a sudden the Trill look different, they can use transporters, there's a different history to them. They just basically took the ideas of the Trill they liked and rewrote the rest.
Absolutely.
And yet there are no Trill purists who are demanding that Deep Space Nine's not canon because of it, right? But yet when the Gorn show up on Strange New Worlds, you and I are both upset.
Yes.
Right? So what's the difference? Is it just because we're older now?
Here we go. It is literally case by case. For me, one more time to legislate the Gorn. For me, callbacks that are fan service, or that was really cool, let's reintroduce it. It irritates me, because I think where you and I come from, I am not the purist who doesn't think you can adjust. But I think you and I both said was I want to create something new. The Changelings were new for Deep Space Nine, and that worked. The Vorta were new, and that was a whole new thing.
Right.
I personally feel that Voyager overdid the Borg. Personally, it was just, oh my gosh, just give us something new. So for me, the thing with things like the Gorn, and yes, bringing Kirk into the series Strange New Worlds, it's because it feels forced to me. You know, it feels like they're changed. Like, for example, with the Trill was a one-off character. That episode, they didn't expect to use it again, and then someone said, well, hey, let's try this on Deep Space Nine with Dax. And then they started, as you said, fleshing it out, because there was one thing what's that, Veronica?
The Gorn was only in a one-off episode.
Well, true, but the difference was they 100% indicated they never discovered the Gorn. They'd never come into the Gorn before. That was part of the whole thing, that it was 100% a new race. So for me, I kind of like to leave it there, and I wish Strange New Worlds would like discover their own race. That's a personal opinion. But then to your point with the Trill, I wish Veronica hadn't said that.
Because,
See,
I mean, with
it's
the
a case
Trill,
by case.
They were a new race.
well, with the Trill, they had 100% established they couldn't use transporters.
Yeah.
And that the fact that they were symbionts or had symbionts was a secret, you know. So
Yeah.
I mean, there is. I think it's just as inconsistent. I'm not saying that to call you out because I was as upset about the Gorn as you. You know what I mean? So, but it's interesting.
Oh no, I 100% agree with Keith. I don't think they should have changed the Gorn, but
right.
Yeah.
And I just like the original Gorn better. But
me too.
Is that because the Gorn had been around for 60 years and the Trill had been around for 2? Or
yeah.
You know what I mean? But really, I mean, I guess it sort of just comes back to the original thought, which was, I mean, how much does continuity matter in Star Trek? And for instance, if they go back and change history, and now history is the history of Star Trek is different. For instance, you know, now presumably La'an, Noonien Singh is living in a universe where, you know, Khan was a child in the 2020s.
Yeah.
In Toronto. So I mean, is it the same prime universe? If both are being considered the prime universe, is Spacey going to happen? Will it happen differently? Do they have the opportunity to refilm it? Are both prime universe? And the thing that it kind of made me laugh when I was sort of thinking this over this week was that in the episode Dos Cerritos on Lower Decks, when they encounter the other Cerritos and they call themselves the prime universe, and the other Ransom says, hey, we're the prime universe.
Absolutely.
So is it just that every universe is the prime universe?
Yeah. It's kind of like when I was a kid and I'd ask my brother, I said, why are we on the top of the world and people down in Australia or whatever on the bottom of the world? And as a kid, I could not understand where he's like, well, it's really just convention. It doesn't matter. Because, you know, even as a kid, you see cartoons where people, when they thought China was on the bottom of the world, you would see where Chinese were standing upside down, quote unquote, versus us. So I agree. It's all in perspective. I also think, going back real quick, the thing with the Trill, that was a really good episode, but it wasn't what I would consider an important episode that was saying a whole lot. With the Gorn, that was a big episode. It introduced a whole new race, not just a race, but a potential battle. It had the Metrons. They established some canon about when they had just encountered them. This is another species that the Federation might go to war with someday. So I think the importance of the Gorn versus the first introduction to the Trill, to me, is a little greater. Why I wish they hadn't messed with the Gorn versus the Trill. But as you say, Veronica, you got a very good point for calling me out, because as we say this, you know, there's somebody on the planet who hates what they did with the Trill and could care less about what they did with the Gorn.
If there's a Trill purist out there who still thinks
I want to know
Odon is the only canon Trill, I would love to hear.
Please tell me you were wrong, but
let's grab a few comments real quick.
Okay, cool.
So Tony says Khan met Chekhov during a commercial.
Yep.
Yeah, say Tony.
In Discovery, cloak ships are commonplace.
Yep. Ooh, Section 31.
On Enterprise, I would say cloak ships are also commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they capture one and fly one around at one point, 100 years before Balance of Terror.
Yeah.
Mark says, in the original series, Kirk and Spock are astounded when the Romulan ship is cloaked, like it was a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. But I guess I got my anger out about that between 2001 and 2005 when Enterprise was flaunting it. So I guess I'm less upset about that now as I was then, I guess.
You know what? The other thing that Mark just make a very good point. In the Enterprise incident, Spock says, I have a theory the Romulans have developed a cloaking device. Even though one of the best episodes of the original series 2 years before was Balance of Terror.
Right.
That was inconsistent production and basically stewardship of their own show. They basically screwed up royally. I'm okay with that screw up. But again, when you do the stuff, when they start sometimes retconning it in some aspects of Discovery and Strange New Worlds, where I'm like, oh, you're doing this for fan service, or you're doing it because Akiva loves Gorn, then I have a little bit of a problem. I can forgive a lot more of those screw ups in the original series. There's an episode of the original series, Is There in Truth No Beauty? And actually, Veronica and I also talking about the Game Sisters of Triskelion. In both of those episodes, if you remember, people were transported like 900 light years across the galaxy.
Yep.
And Enterprise gets there in like 2 hours. I mean, seriously, makes no sense.
Nope.
No sense to how they're supposed to travel.
All right. So Mark says Enterprise is a holo novel played by Riker.
No, nope. I refuse to hear that.
Because Riker has better taste in holo novels.
Oh, wow.
I'm kidding, Enterprise fans. I'm kidding. Right? And then Matt says, I'm particularly forgiving of continuity errors when it is due to upgraded filming technology and meeting modern sensibilities, as
Agreed.
in there being female captains. And I
Agreed.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the prequel thing. Like, it wouldn't be as much of an issue if they wouldn't continually do prequels.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
If you were doing a
Yes.
26th century show that was set in a weird part of the galaxy we'd never
Right.
been before, a lot of these issues just go away. The
Mhm.
Klingons can look however you want. The Gorn can show up and look however you want. You know what I mean? We're Star Trek fans. We'll still complain, but it's you know, they try to act like continuity in Star Trek is so tough. Like, we had to send
Right.
Discovery 900 years in the future to get away from it. Well, stop hanging out 10 years before the original series and with Spock's sister. You know,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yes, I completely. And see, Charles, what you just said, that's the kind of continuity and change that irritate me.
Right.
I love Shaniqua Martin Green.
Mhm.
There is no reason Spock had to have another sibling back home. No reason. I would have watched even without the Spock connection. We would have watched without that kind of stuff irritates me, because that's like, I have a thing where you probably heard me say many times, I hate lazy writing, and it's easy to connect, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. I hope I'm not. I'm pretty sure I'm not. The Batman movie that Tim Burton did, where Joker killed his parents, I hate connections like that. The Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, where the Sandman killed Uncle Ben, I just can't stand those kind of connections. You once said yourself, Charles, like, even with some of the shows, it's like, if you're going to explore strange new worlds, then go out there and explore new stuff and find stuff.
Right.
The original series just hit it out of the park. I mean, let's face it, they created some of the most iconic situations and characters in history. Well, try it again, because Deep Space Nine managed to do it with the Changelings and the Vorta. You got to experiment. That's how I feel about it.
Right. Yeah. And folks in the show, I'm sure, are tired of me complaining about it. But yeah, that's one thing that I think is missing from the new shows, is introducing new, regular, recurring races.
Absolutely.
They can make their own. You can make up your own history for them. Do whatever you want. You know, they could be puppets or CGI, or it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. But I think the Klingon thing bothers me less than, say, the Gorn does. I'll just admit, I don't really care for the new Gorn. I don't think they're very well executed, and I don't like that it's sort of overriding Arena. But the Klingon thing from Discovery bothers me less, I think, because there have already been like 4 different versions of the Klingons, particularly during the 23rd century. And I've always thought it'd be kind of cool if the Klingons were a little more alien than, you know, the space Viking guys who all wear the same outfit from Star Trek 3. You know what I mean? But I mean, I'll admit, though, the adult Gorn they showed in the season finale of Strange New World season 2, I thought was pretty cool. The one that was in a space suit that seemed more technological. I don't care as much for the Gorn when it's Jurassic Park meets Alien.
Same here.
Know? Whereas I like it better. I know. I kind of like the Gorn. The Gorn from the original series just seemed more civilized to me. And people will complain that it seems corny or whatever. But this sort of lizard man in a space toga just seems more interesting to me than a monster that jumps out and, you know, puts its babies in your throat or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we've kind of strayed away from the topic a little bit. But I mean, I guess circling back around a bit, I mean, does continuity between shows matter that much to you? I think, Keith, you've already said it does. Veronica, does it matter to you?
It does, and to a point. I mean, I'm not going to remember a lot of the continuity errors, for one thing, but the ones that I do remember, I don't particularly care for, but they're not as like in your face as they are to some other fans and people who have better memories than I do.
Yeah, see, to me, I think the inter-series continuity is part of just what Star Trek is to me. But in part, I think it's because I grew up with the novels in the 90s, which were very continuity heavy.
Same here.
But also, I grew up reading the Star Trek Encyclopedia when I was a kid, like it was a novel. Like, I would just read that thing like it was a book, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you're reading a fantasy novel and there's a map in the front, and you flip to the front to see where they're here and now they're there, and it makes it just feel more real. You know, and to me, the inter-series continuity does that. But I do think that there should be some play for creators to sort of put their own spin on Star Trek. And Star Trek is an interesting case where, like, you can just exactly recreate what the past was, like in Trials and Tribulations, right? And they just step off into the corridor of the original series, like it's nothing, right? Like it all exists. But Star Trek can also be like the motion picture, where it just completely revamps the entire visual language of the universe, and keeps the parts of the continuity that they think work for that story. And Star Trek has done both with varying degrees of success. I mean, for as long as it's been around. And I think I think the new shows should continue to do that. I mean, I don't think that Strange New Worlds, I do think it's inconsistent with the original series, but I don't think it's more inconsistent with the original series than the original series movies were. Because in the original series movies, the Klingons looked entirely different. The technology looked entirely different. The uniforms were entirely different. Kirk didn't have a brother. Like, you can go on and on. Khan had those 20-year-old disciples and knew who Chekhov was. Like, you can just make a list of all the things that are inconsistent between the original series and the movies. And that was with the same cast. And so, yes, I mean, Nurse Chapel is an entirely different character.
She really is.
From Strange New Worlds to the original series.
Yeah.
But it sort of goes back, I guess, to what Matt said a few minutes ago, that I think that the Chapel from Strange New Worlds is a better character.
Yeah.
Than she was in the original series.
Yeah. I personally would have made her a different character. But again, and also, even I say that, I have to be very careful how I say that. Because if I said that online, somebody would say, oh, so you're one of those men who wants a submissive, whining woman who spends an entire series pining for a guy. No, that's not
I just want a different character on the show. We don't need Nurse Chapel yet.
I agree, because as you said, the Nurse Chapel we get, who is a better character, is so much different from the other one that I think she's a different character. But that, again, that irritates me, but it doesn't make me enjoy the show less.
Right.
But I started to say you'd be surprised, but you guys may not be surprised how incredibly many people in Facebook groups I'm in will just come in and say, Strange New Worlds is a different reality. And they're done. And they really say it, different timeline, and they're done. End of conversation, and you can tell they just can't handle it. So that's what they say.
Are they right?
No.
According to the show,
I think there's an argument to be made there. Because, I mean, for instance, they've explicitly said on Strange New Worlds now that the Romulan time agent changed history, and Khan was born. Like, I mean, there's an argument to be made that we're in a different reality than the original series. And I mean, Chapel's different. And I'm going to go over to Mark's comment real quick, because it sort of goes into this. But Mark says, in the original series, Uhura is shocked to see the Gorn, and later asks Spock who the Vulcan lady is. In Strange New Worlds, she sees plenty of Gorn and actually talks to Spock's wife, and that's true.
Well, does she actually talk to Pring?
I don't think she talks to Pring. Well, I don't know. I don't remember. It seemed like in Pring's early appearances, they made a point of Uhura being like out of the room at the time.
They did.
I don't recall if they've met on the show, but I will say that I don't think that T'Pring from Strange New Worlds is consistent with T'Pring in Amok Time, because, well, for one, if she was, then T'Pring in Amok Time is a sociopath. Because they've established now on Strange New Worlds, for one, that she has known Spock and has been close to Spock and knows Spock's friends, and they've had an ongoing relationship. The implication in Amok Time was that he hasn't seen this person since he was a child, and they have a very restrictive culture where her only way out of this relationship with this man was this plan, right? But that's different if this is someone who you've had an ongoing relationship with as an adult, and they have established on Strange New Worlds that they can just call off their marriage. So her making him fight Kirk to the death seems a little overly spiteful, even if she's mad about him kissing Chapel. You know, like, making him fight his best friend to the death is still, I think, overkill when you can just call off your wedding like they did in the Serene Squall.
And so here we go to the point. Everything about Spock and T'Pol and Chapel, I just don't like, because not even because it's bad, but as you guys both point out, it's so different from the original series, and it's different in a way that, to me, who grew up with it, it doesn't add anything. Because we have societies right now on our planet Earth in 2024 where even now people are still in arranged marriages. And to what you were saying, Charles, so the way they originally framed it and the way it was presented in the original series, I mean, Spock was looking at a picture of T'Pring as a little girl and then as an adult. And the clear implication, although what Akiva Goldsman and them say is they never said it. That's what they keep using.
I know.
The clear implication was they were bonded when they were 7, and they haven't seen each other since then.
Right.
And then, to your point, it makes so much more sense that she's like, I don't want to be married to this half-Vulcan dude who's never going to be home, and Stan's hot and he's right here. Right. It makes so much more sense to me than this other thing. And I actually, to Matt's other point, Mark's point, I've read the interviews. Here they go again. Why is Uhura later on in the original series asking who T'Pring is? Because they said, quote, if you notice, T'Pring and Uhura have never been in the same room at the same time. That's why years later she doesn't recognize her. So the training genius communications officer who hangs out with like most of the female bridge crew, never saw a picture of the woman Spock's having sex with like all the time.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense, but that's what that's their story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same thing how I felt about, for instance, like Uhura just being on the ship during Strange New Worlds, because you watch the menagerie, and the implication to me is that Spock is the one who has served with Pike. You wouldn't imagine that Uhura was also very close to Pike if you watch that episode.
Right.
I mean, same kind of thing with Scotty. I mean, I don't remember now if Scotty was in that episode, but Scotty's on the show now.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if Kirk's command crew comes on board, and Kirk himself, I'd never got the implication from Menagerie that he was close to Pike. Now, you know what I mean? Like the implication was that he has met Pike, he knows him, he respects him, but you wouldn't think that, like, they're not behaving like they're his crew and they're his close friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, even then, you remember they got around that because in the original series, when Commodore Mendez asked Kirk if he'd ever met Captain Pike, Kirk said just once when he was promoted to fleet captain. Again, the implication was Pike was promoted and Kirk took over the ship, and they met during the transfer of command. Well, if you remember, no spoilers for folks, in Strange New World, there was an episode where there was a task force of like 3 ships. That's a fleet. Pike was put in charge of the task, and therefore Pike was for that mission fleet captain, enter Captain Kirk. Now, see, that kind of continuity change irritates me because it's unnecessary.
Yeah,
you know?
Especially when they're about to go to war with the Gorn. So, like, what do you? Why bother?
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's and see, that's the kind, and it's not because I'm a purist, because I think Veronica just said the thing like Chapel is like it's not adding anything for this Chapel versus the other one. Having Kirk in the series right now and T'Pring on this level, it doesn't, for me, add anything that they couldn't have gotten with other characters and different characters. So that kind of callback fan service, hey, let's inject Tribbles again, let's inject Khan, let's inject these popular characters, I find that as lazy writing because I want to see something new. But again, like you said, other people could care less. They're like, dude, get over it. But I think it's unnecessary. Now, Khan, the eugenics war took place from 1992 to 1996. If you're going to halfway claim it's even in a parallel universe close to ours, you got to redo that. You do have to redo that. Right. I kind of get that.
I think I made this point when we discussed that episode way back in the day, or a couple years ago, or last year, or whatever it was. Okay, so maybe you push it forward to 2040, but what happens when we get to 2040 and there's still not eugenics wars?
Same thing, right?
Problem, right? They're doing the same thing they did in the 60s. But I mean, are they going to do the same thing with like past tense? Because there aren't sanctuary districts and Bell riots. You know what I mean? Are we now going to have Gabriel Bell moved forward in time so we can keep it as part of Star Trek? I mean, to me, it just seems silly. I think the continuity of Star Trek, I think, was easier to justify when the original series was way in the past. Right. And that's why it looks old fashioned. Next gen and progressed into DS9 and technology progressed into Voyager. And it felt like it was moving forward because the natural design aesthetics of just artists working on it was moving into the forward. The Enterprise E naturally looked more advanced than the original series Enterprise because it was 1996, not 1966. You know what I mean? But now that, I mean, since Enterprise, we've had prequels and reboots and all of that, and I think it just sort of jumbles it up and unnecessarily. But I mean, I will say that I do really like the new T'Pring. Even though I don't find her consistent with the original T'Pring. I think she's a marvelous character, very well acted. I really like the new Chapel. I think she's a wonderful character.
I agreed.
Just want to throw this out there. You remember in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, there was that time agent from the future who showed up at the end to talk to La'an. And she had her little hologram, like T-cards, I think they call it, the temporal L-cars. And it showed the timeline. And fans have noticed that there was a bit coming off the timeline and then coming back up to the timeline. And people have speculated, like, did the timeline fork and then rejoin somehow? Like, are there two versions of the 23rd century coexisting? which I may be overly complicated, but I mean that's Star Trek fans.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point about has technology and knowledge changed, because now the prevailing theory, and nowadays people who aren't even studying physics know this because of Marvel. The prevailing theory in real science and stuff is that if you could go back in time and change time, you would spin off another reality, no matter what. You can't change the one that exists. So according to that, therefore, all these Star Trek shows and stuff we've seen, they're just different timelines. They're very, very close realities. But the quantum theory and all this stuff now is, if you went back, the whole grandfather paradox. If you go back in time and prevented your grandfather from being born, or you killed your grandfather accidentally or whatever, how could you be born? Because your parents, your mom or dad or whatever, couldn't be born. Therefore, you can't do it. Right. But now the quantum theory is, well, if you go back in time and you somehow kill your grandfather, the reason you were able to go back in time and kill your grandfather, because you're in a new timeline. End of story. And the timeline you came from, you just disappeared one day. Mm-hmm. And in that timeline, your grandfather always lived, and you just created another branching fork of the universe. Yeah. There are days where I really wish, this is strange because I can't stand the Kelvinverse movie's existence, because I just feel they take too much resources and energy away from what I consider to be the original timeline. But there are days where I really wish that the Keepers of the Flame would just go ahead and say Star Trek is in another reality. Mm-hmm. Not the Kelvin universe, but a reality very close to ours, but obviously not exactly ours. Then all the continuity changes no longer matter. They just don't matter, because we don't have to say, there was a novel a few years ago, Charles, you may have read it, where they tried to say the eugenics war was a secret war. Mm-hmm. In 92 to 96, not a hot war.
Greg Cox wrote those books.
Okay.
And it was about continuity and Singh. But yeah, about the eugenics wars, it would take a lot of, like, basically every character that ever appeared in the time travel episodes of the 20th century in Star Trek, but also tying it in with real world events that were going on,
right,
the Persian Gulf and so forth.
Exactly.
And it's actually a really good couple of books. There was also one where Khan is about, called Terrain in Hell, that was about him on SETI Alpha 5. But yeah, there's a popular fan theory that's been around for decades that in First Contact, they changed history. And Enterprise is a result of First Contact, which you could say then Discovery follows on from Enterprise, and Strange New Worlds follows on from Discovery. And you've got a fork in the timeline there. And I think that would make sense to me. Yeah. But ultimately, maybe we should all just take the same, look at the ransoms in Dos Cerritos, and is this the Prime Universe? Yes. Is this the Prime Universe? Yes.
Yes.
and not worry about it.
Yeah, and I think that's where I've lived, because I've been watching. I've said before, I've been watching Star Trek since I was 5 or 6 or 7. I don't know. Right. I just know I've been watching it for over 55, 56 years.
Right.
And for all those who sometimes will call me out and say, you're one of those people who can't adapt, dude, my first memories are of the Cage. And I was there for Deep Space Nine. I was there for Voyager, for Enterprise, for Strange New Worlds, and for Discovery. When I don't like it, it's not because I'm one of those people. I'm not one of those purists who can't adapt. But there are certain things that I would like. So what you guys are saying, I think is right. I like them to remain as consistent as possible, even though I know they have to adjust, and that's the thing. So that's why Kirk and Gorn bother me. Like you said, Charles, even the white-skinned Klingons don't bother me all that much, because you got to
be fair, there was only one of them that was white-skinned. The others were more purple.
Yeah. Well, man, look, another thing you pointed out, which I think is great, even though it's the animated series, the Orions, the blue-skinned Orions.
Right.
They did a great job of inserting that.
Yeah, we didn't get an explanation for that for 50 years. So, maybe in 50 years, they'll explain that the Klingons were performing... maybe the Enterprise virus, they were trying to cure it, and the cure went too far the other way. And so you had monstrous looking Klingons and then you had human looking Klingons, and then they finally got it settled.
Yeah.
And then you have just the Klingons.
I think, I know I mentioned this before in the show. I think the best explanation for the Klingons, other than if you're going to go with Gene Roddenberry and just don't worry about it, was I mentioned this, there used to be a series from DC Comics called Who's Who in the DC Universe. And for those who know, it's an analogy of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe comics. In that thing, it said that the Klingons were a divergent species, like on Earth, if Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal and some of the other many, there's now many more humanoid species who came into existence on Earth than I think people thought. if they had all survived. Or another example would be the Zindi, although they're more extreme. And so basically on Klingon, the planet, there were the people who look like Worf, and there were the people who look like humans. And that made sense to me because they said every few generations or whatever, one of the species would gain ascendancy. And when they gained ascendancy, that would be the face of the Klingons. That one worked for me, but then they came up with the whole thing with Enterprise and the virus and stuff like that. And now it's just really complicated.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Klingons maybe even worked better when they didn't explain. They look different from the original series to motion picture. They look different from the motion picture
Right.
to Star Trek 3. They look different from Star Trek 3 to the Next Generation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe just every Star Trek should have their own version of the Klingons.
That would be fun. Although then it'll become like the thing now is to drive me crazy, which is every captain has to have a catchphrase to go fast, go let's fly, whatever, heck, kick it, punch it, whatever it is.
Yeah. All right. Let's grab a couple of comments real quick because we got on a little bit of a roll there and we're almost out of time. Mark said, the only thing faster than the Enterprise is gossip. He also said, in short Trek, tribbles destroy a starship, yet no one, a couple years later, recognizes a tribble.
Tribbles getting on my nerves, yeah.
He also said, Core looked a lot different in TOS than he did in DS9.
Yeah, they all did.
And Matt Sweatman says, I'm much more chill about continuity today than I was during the Berman years. That's true for me as well. Yeah, really? I spent a lot of time when I was younger complaining about Star Trek on the internet. Now I never do. I'm just kidding. I do.
Is that because the Berman years were worse to y'all in terms of continuity than now?
I think Enterprise was as bad as anything they've done on recent shows. So as far as, I mean, Enterprise chucked out a lot of Star Trek continuity and it ignored a lot of the original series until the ratings were so bad they tried to bring it back in season 4. But I mean, so when people say like real Star Trek ended with Enterprise and Discovery's not canon, I'm like, where were you in 2001?
Yeah, I think it's funny quickly. I think Enterprise is an interesting show because some of the stuff they did I liked. For example, they didn't have shields at first, so they had hull plating, the polarized hull plating. I like that. They didn't have pure phasers, but they had phase cannons. That stuff I was cool with that. But then Travis Mayweather had like a gear shift. You had to hit a big old lever because they're trying to make it retro. You're not going to have a big lever on the ship. I mean, there's a reason you don't. Somebody falls against it and the ship blows up.
They did have one in the motion picture that makes them go to.
Oh, that's true. And all. Yeah, and actually in TNG, didn't a little control joystick come up when they were flying the ship?
And Insurrection, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So maybe
I don't think Insurrection is a good justification for anything they do with Star Trek.
Yeah.
Well, I feel good now that we've solved the problems of Star Trek continuity.
Yeah, I think for me the answer is it depends. It really does.
I think the big thing for me, I keep trying to remind myself of is that these problems have always existed. I'm more upset about the Gorn than I was about the Trill. Because the Trill were newer and I was younger, but I don't wish that Jadzia Dax was more like Odon. You know what I mean? Right. I like the new Trill better. You know, so I mean, I think for any argument you can make against the Gorn, you can make the same argument against the Trill, aside from the Gorn having been around longer, and you know that I watched them when I was 8.
You know? Yeah, I think if the broad strokes hold, I'm okay. Like you said, if Khan's got to be pushed forward in future, as long as it's kind of the same Khan, I'm okay. You know, if the Enterprise if it goes 900 light years in a day in this episode, and it takes 90 years to go 900 light years, I'll deal with it as long as they're still talking about, you know, dilithium crystals and things like that. That's still more or less consistent. Right. So I think the broad strokes is what I want.
Right. Yeah, and I mean the distances is a good point because in the original series they flew to the edge of the galaxy. Yeah, Star Trek 5 they flew to the center of the galaxy.
Right.
If you actually figured out how far the distance is between the center of the galaxy and the edge of the galaxy, the speeds to accomplish that in a single lifetime would be phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, even the Enterprise and the Archer went to the Klingon homeworld in like a week.
4 days.
Yeah, right. See,
I know. I remember.
Makes no sense.
Yeah. But I think the thing is that we're grading the new shows, I think, on a steeper scale than we graded the old shows. Yeah. And I think that a lot of fans forget that. And I think it's worth pointing out from time to time that a lot of the things that fans complain about the new shows, myself included, I'm not calling fans out for that, could ease those same complaints about continuity and consistency could be leveled at the original shows. And I mean, maybe we should just take the ransom philosophy and just claim they're all the prime universe and continue on with our lives.
That was a good one. I did like that.
Yeah. All right, Keith, where can people find more of you?
You can find me on Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook groups.
And how about us, Veronica?
Feltnerdy.com.
That's right. And if you're in the Atlanta area, come see us on Sunday. It should be in the 40s by then. We should be able to travel, and you can come see us at the Red Light Cafe at 3 p.m. We'll be performing alongside a great duo called Bean and Bear. And we're working on booking some more shows, both all ages shows and adult shows for 2025. So come out and see us. Veronica, where else can people find us?
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
That's right. We've got a couple of episodes in the can that are a lot of fun. So check that out on your favorite podcast platform or at monkeyingaround.com. And Veronica, do you have a closing for us this week?
Discovery Klingons are canon.
Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you
Thanks,
for
all.
joining us, and we will see you next time.
Take care.